It is my pleasure to introduce tonight, we have two speakers, John and Ena, who have been bird watching for most of their lives and have had the opportunity to travel pretty well around the world, looking at the most amazing natural places. They told me some of where they've been. I'm sure a lot of you know John and Ena anyway. They both love to take photos, especially of birds, but other wildlife and native plants. In their presentation tonight, the focus is hummingbirds. And John was telling me his goal is to photograph all the hummingbirds in the Americas. And I think he's getting pretty close. So we will hear about that tonight. So John, I'm going to share my screen with you now. There we go. So if you want to pull up your slides. And
okay, can you see that?
Yes, we can, or I can. Yep.
Okay.
Now, I don't know. So, good. So here we go. Carry on.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining us for our show on the wonder of hummingbirds. We are not experts on hummingbirds, but we have had the opportunity to travel and bird on trips. So we have collected many photos of hummingbirds we'd like to share with you, along with data and information about what makes hummingbirds so unique and wonderful. But first, what's in a name? Hummingbirds got their name because of the humming sound created by their beating wings, which they flap at high frequencies audible to humans.
This is a photograph of an Andean emerald taken in Colombia. Today, hummingbirds are found in a wide variety of habitats across the Americas. The common ancestor of hummingbirds is estimated to have lived 22 million years ago in South America. They flourished in the South American lowlands, and between 6 to 12 million years ago, they colonized the rising Andes Mountains. Hummingbirds were once found in Europe. For example, the rufous hummingbird was once found in Siberia. You can see from the data here that Colombia has the most species. Ecuador and Peru have the next greatest diversity, with only 16 species found in the US and Canada. The hummingbird family is hugely diverse. There could be somewhere between 362 and 371 living species, depending on which sources you go to. And new discoveries are still being made. The blue-throated hill star, for example, was discovered in 2017 in Ecuador. And just recently, the Santa Marta saberwing, thought to be extinct, was rediscovered. There's only 2 other bird families containing more species. We'll let you think about that, about which families they might be. And if you know or want to make a guess, you can enter your answer in the chat function. So what would these 2 other families be? And for bonus points, do you know, or would you like to guess how many species are in the largest and the second largest families? Enter that into the chat function too, and we'll review your answers later. Likewise, any questions you have, please put them in chat so we can be efficient with everyone's time and attention, and we'll try to answer those later.
These photographs here are of a shining green hummingbird and a collared inca, both taken in Colombia. Recent genetic analysis shows there are basically 2 groups of hummingbirds, the dull-colored sicklebills and hermits in one group, and all the others in a second group. We'll show you examples of these. Some researchers believe there's a third group because topazes and Jacobins don't seem to fit genetically into the other two groups. Identification can be tricky. Hummingbirds show a lot of plumage variation. Also, hybridism, albinism can occur to add to the confusion. Hummers have iridescent plumage, so their colors vary with the light and angle of perspective. Young male plumage is often similar to that of an adult female. In some species, for example, white-necked Jacobin, the females assume the male plumage type with age. Bill and head shape is often key to ID, as well as tails are often important for distinguishing between species. On a sad note, 55 hummingbird species, almost 15%, face serious conservation challenges. Their statuses range from near threatened to critically endangered.
This is a photograph of a rufous hummingbird taken at Bow Valley Provincial Park. There are only 6 species of hummingbirds found in Canada. We'll talk about each of them later, except the Costas, which is very rare here or vagrant. Only 29 species of hummingbirds migrate long distances, with the calliope being the smallest of the long distance flyers. The ruby-throated crosses the Gulf of Mexico, a round trip of more than 1,600 kilometers. However, the rufous makes the longest known avian migration measured in body lengths. Other birds, such as terns and shorebirds, make much longer actual migrations. A rufous recorded in Florida was found 5 months later in Alaska, 5,600 kilometers away. So potentially it was doing a round trip of over 11,000 kilometers. In the tropics, 42 hummingbird species are known to migrate short distances. Also, 87 species migrate from higher to lower altitudes annually to follow their favored flowers.
A collared Inca and fawn-breasted brilliant, photographed in Colombia. To create the lift needed to hover and to maneuver with precision, Hummer's wings move in a figure of 8, which gives it twice as much lift as the flight pattern of other birds. Hummers can do this because their wings are hinged with a flexible joint that allows 180 degree of movement, and they have mobile shoulders as well. Wings make a forward stroke, then they are rotated, so they are inverted, ready for the backward stroke that maintains lift for both elements of the wing beat. They average 55 wing beats per second. They hover better than any other species, and they can fly backwards. Other birds can hover, but few other birds can fly backwards. For example, tropic birds. The humming of their wings alerts other birds to the arrival of a fellow forager or potential mate.
These are a white-bellied wood star and buffy hummingbird, both photographed in Colombia. No other birds are as proficient at aerial maneuvering, and no others are so utterly dependent upon it. Hummers are the only birds that can maintain steady, controlled hovering over long periods of time. Their ability to do so is based on special modifications of their flight mechanism and on their ability to burn oxygen at a rate that is the highest relative to body size of any vertebrate. For example, researchers have measured that a hovering hummingbird burns fuel at 10 times the rate of a highly trained human athlete.
Here's a couple of short videos. The first one of taken in Ecuador is in slow motion, includes white-necked Jacobin, the ones with the white tails, where you can see the wings, how they can hover and how they can fly backwards. And this is one at regular speed.
Here are photographs of the bearded mountaineer taken in Peru and the Andean emerald taken in Colombia. All hummingbird species share a diet of both nectar and arthropods, such as insects, spiders, and crustaceans. Hummers mostly consume the nectar in flowers that have evolved to mutually benefit both the hummingbirds and the plants. That is, the hummingbirds visit flowers for the nectar food in exchange for pollinating the plant. Hummingbirds have several strategies for feeding. Many species are territorial, fiercely defending a patch of flowers as their own. Some species may use and defend the same clump of flowers, like heliconias, for up to 5 years. However, it's very important to their survival that when nectar is not available, they eat insects. Insects make up about 10% of their diet by mass. Insects provide them with amino acids, the building block of proteins, and proteins build and maintain their muscles and feathers. Hummingbirds can fly catch on the wing by opening their gape and swallowing. Some people call them sugar-powered flycatchers. Other hummingbirds have different strategies. Often those with the curved and long bills use trap lines to follow the same route to flowers of the same type. They visit this series of plants in rotation. Other smaller hummingbirds, such as coquettes, are raiders or opportunists. And a very few species are what we call nectar parasites. That is, they pierce the corolla of the flower and take the nectar, but they don't pollinate the plant. Some hummingbirds also pierce berries to feed on their energy-rich, sugary juice.
Photographs here are of a Chelima blossom crown and a booted racket tail, again photographed in Colombia. Feeders are sometimes used in the tropics at lodges so that visitors can easily see the species, which would normally be dispersed throughout the forest. Especially in the north, feeders provide artificial food supplementation when flowers are not available early or late in the season. Artificial feeders are sometimes claimed to be responsible for delaying hummingbird migration, though there is not much scientific evidence to support this. However, the genetic drive to migrate is stronger than the attraction of a feeder. So you can leave your feeders up until the hummingbirds depart. However, feeders may contribute to predation by domestic cats and to an increase in window collisions. Hummingbirds will not survive on a diet exclusively of artificial sugar water, but can manage for a few days without other dietary essentials.
Here we have a crowned wood nymph photographed in Colombia and a lesser violet ear photographed by our bird guide in Peru, Percy. Though through linked evolution, there is a close, mutually advantageous relationship between hummingbirds and the specialist plant flowers they pollinate. Flowers that are adapted to hummers tend to be brightly colored, tubular, and accessible to birds in flight. Studies on hummingbird visits to several species of monkey flowers indicate that hummingbirds prefer flowers with the most tubular-shaped corollas, regardless of color. In these plants, flower shape but not color was associated with sugar content of the nectar. Most importantly, these flowers have a good supply of nectar. Hummingbirds prefer sucrose over fructose or glucose. And unlike other songbirds, they can break down sucrose. Therefore, they prefer flowers with sucrose. Hummingbirds will consume 2 grams of sucrose a day, even though their body only weighs from 3 to 5 grams. So half their body weight a day of sucrose. No wonder they get so buzzed.
A gorgeted wood star and a Santa Marta blossom crown, both photographed again in Colombia. The flower anther, which is the pollen-producing organ, and the tube are often placed so that the hummingbird's forehead and/or throat get a dab of pollen when they seek nectar. This leaves a yellow or orange patch on their forehead or neck, as shown in the photo on the right. It is not just pollen. Flower mites will hitch a lift between flowers they live on and feed on. When the hummingbird's bill appears in a flower that the mites want to leave, they rapidly climb on board and survive the flight by traveling inside the bird's nostrils. When they detect they have arrived at another favored flower, they leave the nostrils and hurry down the bill to the new flower while the bird feeds. Flowers that hang downwards are protected from rain, but they require 10% more energy for the hummingbird to feed from. Not surprisingly, hummingbirds' breeding season coincides with prime flowering time. Astonishingly, they can visit up to 30 flowers in 1 minute.
The purple-throated wood star and collar dinka were photographed in Colombia. The tongue of a hummingbird is forked and has fringes at the end, which probably help to entangle small insects. Their tongue also has a pair of grooves into which nectar moves from the flower through capillary action. So they don't suck the nectar through their tongue. Instead, fluids are moved by wicking and licking behavior. They extract nectar from flowers by extending their tongue into the flower corolla while hovering. Their tongue can actually distinguish the types of sugar and the dilution of the nectar.
And here I have a video, which is fairly rapid, so you need to watch carefully when the bird extracts its bill from the feeder. They dip their tongue in and out to feed, and the tongue is retracted from the nectar and then squeezed into its mouth. As the tongue is again extended through the nearly closed bill. You can see it whipping its tongue in and out there. The hummingbird consumes nectar with 13 to 36 licks per second. A feeding bout may last less than 1 second to several seconds.
Here we have a sword-billed hummingbird on the left, and you have to look closely to see the length of that bill, and a rainbow-bearded thornbill. Both of them were photographed in Colombia. Bill length is often well matched to the length and shape of the flowers. However, perfect matches are not always available, so generally hummers don't restrict themselves to a single feeding strategy. Females generally have longer bills than males. The sword-billed has the longest bill of any hummingbird at 9 to 11 centimeters. It's the only bird species with a bill longer than its body. It specializes in feeding on passion flowers as well as fuchsia and datura, and it tends to hold it upright like that, as is shown on the photograph on the left. And I think maybe it's something like a balance issue that it has. It doesn't hold it parallel. It holds it upright.
The buff-tailed sicklebill, photographed in Peru, and a mountain velvet breast photographed in Colombia. Hummingbirds have developed their bill shape and length to feed from their favored flowers. The sicklebills' extraordinary bills have co-evolved with the structure of flowers they pollinate. The buff-tailed sicklebill is never far from a stand of heliconias, but it also feeds on lobelias. The mountain velvet breast is much more often seen hovering over long tubular flowers, such as lobelia, paintbrush, and salvia.
Here we have a glowing puff leg photographed in Colombia.
Yeah.
And can you hear me? A glowing puff leg photographed in Colombia and a white-necked Jacobin photographed in Ecuador. Their tiny feet are used for perching only as they fly from one spot to another. Despite their superb flying skills, if a hummer is able to perch, it often will. The higher the altitude, the more and longer hummers perch. Hummingbirds may occasionally land on the ground, but they don't walk on the ground.
A black Inca, pretty special bird, and a shining green hummingbird, both photographed in Colombia. Maintaining the balance between its high-speed lifestyle and finding enough fuel is critical, so they take opportunities to conserve energy on handy perches. They spend up to 80% of their time perched, and even more at higher altitudes. That's 80% of their time perched. They burn energy so fast during the day that most species cannot make it through the night on a stomach full of nectar, so most go into torpor every night to reduce energy loss, even in the tropical environments. Torpor is a slowing down of bodily functions to conserve heat and energy, a bit similar to hibernation.
Here we have a green crown brilliant and a violet-tailed sylph, both of them photographed in Colombia. Hummingbirds' eyes are on the sides of their head, not on the front. This allows the bird to view a wide area behind, to the sides, and even above it, as well as in front. This is important when keeping a lookout for predators and rivals. Hummers are among a number of bird groups that have a second fovea. That's the part of the eye where visual reception is sharpest. The first fovea, like ours, provides sharp forward vision, while the second fovea enhances sideways vision. Having two fovea improves the bird's depth perception and its ability to judge speed and distance, which I think is very important to hummingbirds.
Western emerald and short-tailed emerald, photographed in Colombia. Their brain is tiny, but still 5 times bigger proportionally than many other birds, and apparently 10 times bigger than that of a redstart. The hummingbird brain is 4.2% of its body weight, much bigger by comparison than to the human brain, which is about 2.25% of our body weight. Its brain provides critical spatial memory, such as location of flowers. Hummers appear to be able to calculate how long it will take for a flower to refill with nectar. Also, they learn their songs, which are varied and complex, with many syllables. For example, the Ana's hummingbird song apparently has 38 syllables.
This is a video of white-bellied woodstar photographed in Colombia. Hummingbirds have the largest heart by percentage of body weight in the entire animal kingdom at 2.5%. Compare that to the human heart, which is just 0.5% of our body weight. I think we always suspected that our feisty hummingbird visitors have big hearts.
The chestnut-breasted coronet, taken in Ecuador, and a violet saberwing, taken in Belize. Hummingbirds take approximately 500 breaths per minute. When resting in a state of torpor, their breaths are reduced to below 50 a minute, and their metabolism is slowed down by as much as 50% in Ana's hummingbird. The further north they live, the less hummers go into torpor because the nights are shorter in summer, so they have more time to feed.
A little sun angel was photographed in Ecuador and the gorgeted wood star in Colombia. Iridescent hummingbird colors result from a combination of refraction of light and pigmentation. By merely shifting position, feathers of a muted looking bird can instantly appear to become fiery red or vivid green or many other colors. The actual feather color may be buff, brown, or rufous. A male hummer uses his iridescent gorget or throat patch to display and demonstrate his ownership of a patch of flowers that he constantly patrols.
A tourmaline sun angel photographed in Colombia and a brown varletia photographed in Ecuador. Molecules in the surfaces of the feathers refract the light to produce the colors. The brilliance and variety of colors may attract the females to decide who they will mate with. The gorget colors decline over time. For example, a ruby-throated gorget becomes more orange than ruby over time.
The amazing booted racket-tail and long-tailed sylph, both photographed in Colombia. Hummingbirds are polygynous, meaning males mate with multiple females over the breeding season. There are no pair bonds. The males of some species form courtship groups known as leks. Hummingbirds that attend leks tend to also trapline for food, such as hermits. Males court females either from leks or by defending a rich patch of nectar-bearing flowers. Other species have distinctive aerial displays. Their tail is very important in mating displays. The males perform swooping or diving displays while courting the females. Rufous, Anas, and Allens have a J-shaped flight display, whereas ruby-throated, black-chinned, Calliope and Costas make U-shaped arcs in their diving display. And the Lucifer hummingbird makes an L-shaped display. The dive sound is a loud sound produced during the courtship display dive. Historically, it was thought to be vocal due to similarities with the song. However, researchers have found that the sound is generated by the outer tail feathers at the bottom of the dive. The male may also sing before or after performing a dive. And Ana's hummingbirds have been recorded diving at 95 kilometers per hour.
A rufous-tailed hummingbird on its nest in Belize, and a rufous-breasted hummingbird on its nest in Amazonia in Peru. The females tend to all aspects of parental care from nest building onwards. Hummingbirds' tiny nests come in a variety of shapes and locations. The typical nest is an open cup on a branch or branch fork, but some species build domed or partially domed nests. Hermits, like the one on the right, build pendant nests attached with spider silk to large overhanging leaves. The female hermit does not look comfortable in her nest, but this is the position with tail up and bill up. If you look carefully, you can see that they adopt when brooding. Other species build nests in niches on rock faces and cliffs. The female may fly around the leaf while binding the nest in place with spider silk. Females typically lay 2 white eggs and incubate the eggs alone for 2 to 3 weeks, for up to 75% of daylight hours. How small is a hummingbird egg? About the size of a Tic Tac. Females feed the chicks a diet of invertebrates and nectar until they fledge after 3 to 6 weeks.
Here are photographs of a giant hummingbird taken in Peru and a little wood star, the other end of the size spectrum, taken in Ecuador. The largest hummingbird is the giant, weighing 18 to 25 grams and measuring 23 centimeters long, about the size of a red-winged blackbird. It also has a slower wing beat than other hummingbirds. The smallest hummingbird is also the smallest bird in the world, the bee hummingbird of Cuba. It weighs just 1.6 to 2.6 grams and is only 5 to 6 centimeters long. Also in the bee family, the smallest wood stars are the gorgeted and Santa Marta wood stars, which are slightly bigger than the bee at 6 centimeters. And this little wood star is just a tiny bit bigger than that at 6 to 7 centimeters.
An Ecuadorian hill star, photographed in Ecuador by bird guide Jorge Cruz, and a shining sunbeam photographed in Colombia. Species like hill stars, sunbeams, and saber wings and helmet crests live at high altitude in the cloud forest and in the Paramo up to the snow line as high as 4,800 meters. That's 16,000 feet. The hill stars seek out protected roosts and go into torpor at night.
Here we have the buff-tailed sicklebill, photographed in Peru, and the tawny-billed, oh, no, we don't.
Yeah.
Tawny-billed hermit. Pale-bellied hermit. Okay, photographed in Colombia. As mentioned, hummingbirds can be divided into 2 main groups, the dull-colored sicklebills and hermits in one group, and all the others in the second group. There are 37 species of hermits, including sicklebills. The males and females look similar, quite dull. They commute widely and feed by trapline strategy because they specialize in dispersed flowers with sugar-rich nectar, like heliconias. Sicklebills have especially strong feet for clinging to flowers and feeding upside down.
Photograph of a female rosetted wood star and a male white-bellied wood star, both taken in Colombia. The others group of hummingbirds can be divided into 7 family groups: mangoes, coquettes, brilliants, mountain gems, emeralds, bees, including wood stars, and the giant hummingbird, which is in its own subfamily. Males and females are sexually dimorphic. That is, they look very different. There are 36 species of bees, including the bee hummingbird, the wood stars, shear-tails, and the northern hummingbirds, such as ruby-throated and rufous hummingbird. Although they are amongst the smallest, wood stars have the loudest wing-beat hum, the sound that gives hummingbirds their names, or their name. Males court their females with spectacular aerial dive displays. Their brilliant colors are mainly in their gorget.
Here we have photos of buff-tailed coronet and great sapphire wing, both taken in Colombia. There are 48 species of brilliants, including coronets, incas, pufflegs, brilliants, racket tails, sapphire wings, and star frontlets, as well as the sword-billed hummingbird and the marvelous spatule tail, two of the most spectacular of all.
We have not seen the marvelous spatule tail, which occurs in northern Peru. The coquettes, here a green-tailed train bearer, photographed in Colombia, and a festive coquette, photographed in Peru. It's a female green-tailed train bearer. There are 60 species of coquettes, including fire crowns, helmet crests, hill stars, metal tails, sylphs, train bearers, thornbills, thorntails, and of course, coquettes themselves. Note that coquettes and thorntails show a white rump band. The tail of the male green-tailed train bearer is nearly twice his body length. The male enhances his display flights by making snapping noises with his tail.
Here we have photos of crowned wood nymph and indigo-capped hummingbird, both taken in Colombia. There are 108 species of emeralds, the largest of the hummingbird lineages, including saber wings, wood nymphs, sapphires, streamer tails, and the snowcap. Some of these species can be found straying into the South US, such as buff-bellied, broad-billed, white-eared, and violet-crowned hummingbirds.
A Talamanca hummingbird and a white-throated mountain gem, both photographed in Costa Rica. There are 17 species of mountain gems, including star throats, fiery throats, blue throats, and the Riverlees and Talamanca hummingbirds. The latter two were recently split from the magnificent hummingbird. So when I photographed this bird of the Talamanca hummingbird, it was called a magnificent hummingbird.
The black-breasted mango and sparkling violet ear were both photographed in Colombia. There are 29 species of mangoes, including violet ears, lancebills, caribs, golden throats, fairies, and sunbeams. And don't you just love the names that hummingbirds have acquired? The black and white necktie pattern of the female mangoes is very distinctive, as you can see on the left.
A rufous hummingbird photographed in Bow Valley Provincial Park, and another one which was borrowed from the internet. Finally, we turn up to our hummingbirds. The northern hummingbirds use two major flyways. Rufous hummingbirds tend to follow the early spring route up the west coast of the US and Canada, but they generally migrate southwards along the Rockies in mid to late summer. Those flying up the west coast arrive at their breeding grounds sooner than those coming up the eastern side of the Rockies. In BC, the main movement occurs in April on the coast and May in the interior. Males tend to precede females in their northbound migration, arriving on breeding grounds in western Alberta several days before the females. Rufous hummingbirds tend to return to the same locations for summer and winter. In BC, most males have left their breeding grounds by mid-June to early July, likely moving to higher elevations where the flowers are more available. Females begin to leave about a week after their young fledge. Most have left by late June or early July. Fledglings begin to leave soon after the adult females depart, with most gone by mid-July in British Columbia. In Alberta, males leave their breeding territories in early July, with most gone by mid-July. Females depart at least 1 to 4 weeks later than the males. Juveniles is still relatively common in Alberta until mid-August. Stragglers can be seen in both BC and Alberta throughout August. They spend winter in California and further south to Mexico and even as far south as Panama. Their fidelity to their migration route, wintering sites, and breeding sites indicate they have a keen spatial memory capacity. The timing of their migration is generally related to when their favorite flowers are blooming. However, northern hummers hang out close to sapsuckers in spring because sapsuckers return north before hummers and drill holes in trees, causing the sap to flow, which attracts insects and hummingbirds. Sapsucker wells provide food before flowers are blooming, as do human-provided feeders.
The rufous hummingbird on the right was photographed in Bow Valley Provincial Park, and the one on the left in Saskatchewan was borrowed from the internet. The rufous is our most common hummingbird by far. It's feisty but small. Its body length about 9.5 centimeters, wing length about 11.5 centimeters, and its body weighs an average of 3.4 grams. It weighs less during spring migration north and is heavier when southbound in fall. The rufous hummingbird has the most metabolically active liver known, with the highest levels of enzymes needed to synthesize lipid or reform glucose. So they're unique in many ways. Among animals studied so far, the volume of muscle in rufous hummingbird flight muscles is second only to flies. Now, I'm sure you're impressed with that. On their breeding grounds in Alberta, the male display flight follows a J shape in both ascent and descent. Gorget flashes and tail flaring are nearly always directed at other males, while waggle flights, also seen as part of the dive display, are nearly always directed at females. In flight, the male rufous hummingbird's wings emit a metallic whine reminiscent of a small turboprop airplane. In Alberta, the females usually build their nests in conifers and lay 2 eggs in June. The females incubate the eggs for 15 to 17 days, leaving the nest for only a few minutes at a time. The young remain in the nest for 21 to 26 days. There is no definitive scientific evidence that rufous prefer red flowers. Flower color choice is learned through experience, that is, which is the most rewarding food-wise. They take nectar from tubular flowers such as columbine, penstemon, paintbrush larkspur, honeysuckle, fireweed, snapdragon, and bee plant. Plus, they take insects such as gnats, midges, whiteflies, and aphids. So they're great to have in your garden. Hummingbirds have unusually long lifespans for organisms with such rapid metabolisms. The average hummingbird lifespan is 3 to 5 years. Rufous and ruby throats can live up to 9 years, though, and some individuals have lived as long as 12 years.
The ruby-throated hummingbird and calliope hummingbird, both these photographs were borrowed. Despite their tiny size, ruby-throated hummingbirds fly non-stop across the Gulf of Mexico during fall and spring migration. They make that 800-kilometer crossing in 24 hours. To accomplish this, they have to double their body mass by fattening up on nectar and insects before they depart. Ruby throats are common and widespread in the east and extend their range as far as central and south Alberta. Their breeding range closely follows the range of eastern deciduous and mixed boreal forests. The ruby throat prefers, but is not limited to, red tubular flowers. The ruby throat pollinates many species of flowers in eastern North America, like trumpet creeper vine, which appears to be primarily adapted to pollination by this species. Canadian ruby-throated hummingbirds migrate south to Mexico and Central America.
The calliope hummingbird is the smallest North American breeding bird. The male is just 7.5 centimeters long. It boldly defends its territory with a body mass about half that of North America's smallest passerine, the bush tit. The calliope is of special interest as the smallest long-distance avian migrant in the world. Some calliopes travel 9,000 kilometers in their annual round trip as they migrate to the Canadian Rockies from the Pacific side of central and southern Mexico and back again. They're more likely to be found in Calgary during migration. The male calliope flashes the magenta rays of his beautiful and unique gorget. The calliope has a relatively shorter tail and shorter wings than larger hummingbirds. And because of that, the wing beat frequencies or hum of the calliope make it sound more like a bumblebee. The calliope is a mountain specialist, breeding as high as the timberline. In Canada, it breeds in central interior BC and scarcely in southwest Alberta. They love subalpine flower meadows. Their favorite flower species include typical red tubular flowers, as well as a wide variety of yellow, white, blue, and purple flowers. The calliope feeds regularly at sap wells created by sapsuckers, probably taking both insects and sap.
The photograph on the left is of Ana's hummingbird taken in Calgary, and a black-chinned hummingbird, again borrowed. The Ana's hummingbird has expanded its range dramatically since the mid-1930s. It only nested in Southern California once, but now breeds to northern Vancouver Island in Alaska, eastward through southern Arizona, as far as West Texas. This species arrived in BC in the 60s and 70s. Its population has doubled since 1980. Its use of widely cultivated exotic plants in gardens, as well as hummingbird feeders, has contributed to its increased numbers and expanded range. Flowers are usually preferred over feeders when a choice is available, but feeder visitation increases when flower resources drop. Feeders seem to have had a beneficial effect on the population, but the actual impact is not being studied in detail. Male Ana's hummingbirds attract attention through their elaborate dive displays. The male ascends approximately 30 to 35 meters and then plummets towards its target, that is, a female Ana's hummingbird. They flap their wings to gain speed, producing a trill. They then fold their wings at the bottom of the dive and spread their tail. Males sing more conspicuously than any other North American hummingbird, and their songs are learned and complex. Males turn their head from side to side as they sing, flashing their brilliant iridescence as a signal to other hummingbirds. Ana's hummingbird can sometimes survive several hours without food, but probably they cannot go an entire day without food. Starvation is likely the major cause of their mortality. When resting, Ana's hummingbirds can go into torpor and reduce their breaths to below 50 per minute and slow their metabolism by 50%.
The black-chinned hummingbird has a discontinuous breeding range that includes south central BC and very occasionally southern Alberta. Their breeding range goes from the interior of South BC, Okanagan and Kootenays, then south through Washington and Oregon to Mexico. Birds arrive in BC during the last 2 weeks of May, with males 1 or 2 weeks before females. In their northernmost breeding populations in BC, males begin to disappear from the breeding areas in mid to late June, with most gone by the end of July, presumably to begin migrating south. Adult females and young begin to depart in July, and most have left by mid-August. They mostly winter in Mexico.
A wire-crested thorntail taken in Ecuador and a buff-winged starfrontlet taken in Colombia. As we mentioned, 55 species of hummingbirds are facing serious conservation threats. If you would like to help hummingbirds, you might want to look at the American Bird Conservancy and the International Conservation Fund of Canada, ICFC, who work with hundreds of partners and communities in many countries to buy and conserve land for hummingbirds and other birds. Also, they have established nurseries of trees and plants to replenish depleted habitat that could shelter and feed hummingbirds. In addition, the Nature Conservancy of Canada continues to acquire land to protect and rehabilitate important bird habitats. These are just a few organizations that are protecting land to help and sustain vulnerable species in Canada and internationally. We hope we have wowed you with the wonder of hummingbirds. And with that, our presentation ends.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, John and Ena. That is great. Just wanting to, just a second here. Yeah, okay. So if you want to turn your slides off, then I'm going to get the chat box up.
Yeah. Okay.
So there we are. Okay. Okay. So we have some answers to your questions.
Oh, great.
I didn't make a guess here. Sparrows, gulls, sparrows, warblers, flycatchers.
Well,
Answer?
actually, whoever suggested flycatchers, that's pretty close. The largest family of birds is Tyrannidae, the tyrant flycatchers, with, oh, I shouldn't say how many species because I don't know if people have guessed that. But there are 438 species in the tyrant flycatcher family, and new ones are regularly being discovered and described. These insectivorous perching birds are found throughout North, Central, and South America and are extremely diverse in form. Some familiar examples are kingbirds, peewees, and flycatchers.
So well done. And
Interesting.
you're correct, it is Sir Jade, Carla.
Oh,
Did
it is
anybody,
Sir
were there any other guesses? Because there's the second largest family hasn't been revealed yet.
Oh, that's right. No, well, the other guesses are sparrows, gulls, or warblers.
Okay, so the second largest family is tanagers.
Oh, yes, of course.
The IOC recognizes 386 tanager species. This family is found primarily in South and Central America and the Caribbean. Scientific studies have shown that the 20 species called tanagers in the genera Piranga, which includes our North American tanagers, as well as some other tanagers, are actually now have been placed in the cardinal family. So our tanagers are cardinals, and those would be tanagers like the Western tanager, scarlet, summer, and hepatic. So they're now in the cardinal family.
Interesting. I don't see any questions here. Does anybody have any questions? It was a great presentation, and obviously we all need to travel to Colombia and Peru and to see all these beautiful birds. Here's as Mark's saying, we mentioned Percy in Peru. I wonder if it's the same Percy who was our guide.
Um,
And he was great.
he could be. I've got his full
Yeah.
name here. Percy
Wow.
Avendaño Medina.
I don't know.
I
So here's a question.
I suspect it's the same person.
Yeah, it could be the same. So a question, do hummingbirds molt?
All birds molt.
Okay, and so, all right, so that's one of the questions. Do they molt? When do they molt?
I
So
would
I
guess.
guess
I would
Pre
guess.
and post,
I would guess.
pre-migration and post.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So lots of comments saying great, great, great. Here's a question. What film do you use for the great photos?
Sorry, what?
Or what what
Camera.
film, but it probably means what camera, because we don't use film anymore.
These photos were taken over a number of years, so it's actually changed. I used to use SLR cameras. In fact, the ones I took in Costa Rica that were in there were taken back in the days of film, digitized. But more recently, I've tended to like using bridge cameras, just because they weigh a lot less and are a lot less heavy. So I'm using now a Sony RX10 Mark IV, which is a wonderful bridge camera. And I could give a whole presentation on photographing birds, I guess. But one of the things I would say I love about it is you can easily change the ISO speed, allowing you to take very, very fast shutter speeds to freeze the wings of hummingbirds. I'm taking them at up to 1/10,000th of a second. In the old days, I used to use a flash with a diffusing filter, and I try and offset the flash. But I really don't like using flashes. Now I don't use flash at all, because I can change the ISO and speed the shots up so much. So I'm a huge fan of this Sony camera until someone comes out with a better one.
Thank you. All right. I don't see any other questions here. I don't see any other questions. So where is your next trip? What hummingbirds have you not seen yet? What's your target?
Quite a few to see. We've never been to Brazil yet.
To where?
Hummingbird you get
Brazil. Brazil.
Oh, Brazil. Oh,
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
One hummingbird you get right down in the south. And I would say I have some hummingbird photographs from the USA, but they were all taken in the days of film and I've not digitized them. But in answer to your question, we haven't actually finalized our next trip. We got one that I wanted to do, and we may do it yet, but it couldn't happen because of COVID. I always said I'd return to Africa from where I originally came once every 10 years, and I'm now overdue. So it wouldn't surprise me if we're back to Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania. Tanzania being my current favorite. I was born in Uganda.
Okay. I have a question. You just reminded me of a question. So hummingbirds are North America, South American birds. Sunbirds that you see in Africa or other parts of the world, how closely related are they to hummingbirds? Because they look like hummingbirds.
They're definitely in the same niche in that they're nectar feeding birds. So the sunbirds of Africa and Asia basically fill the niche of hummingbirds of the Americas. Similarly, the honey creepers in Australia fill that niche.
Mhm. Okay. Okay.
The honey eaters.
Sorry, the honey.
Honey eaters. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, what do you think about hummingbird feeders? Somebody's asked.
Um,
I think you
Well-
mentioned that.
you know, they can be controversial. Some people do not like them at all, and other people use them to help the hummingbirds through their transition seasons. So, you know, it depends on your perspective. But as I think we said during the presentation, there's no really hard evidence that hummingbird feeders are harmful. And they do tend to cause a collection of different species to come together. So, for example, when you go to the tropics, the lodges use feeders,
Feeders.
so that the hummingbirds come in from the forest occasionally, and the visitors can see them. But then they go back to the forest and feed on their flowers. So there has been research done. And I haven't seen any negative research so far about the lodges using feeders.
One thing I would add is if you decide to use a hummingbird feeder, it's a commitment. Because once you've got hummingbirds coming to your feeder, you want to keep your feeder full or with fresh sugar water. You must do that because, you know, if they will put that feeder into their trap line, places to go feed. And if it's suddenly removed, it can have a negative impact.
And when it's hot, like it's been this summer, you have to frequently refresh the sugar water. Otherwise, it will actually be harmful because it'll start to go off. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for this talk. Very, very informative, and your photos are lovely. So I hope you've been reading the comments down the side here that are very, very positive towards your presentation. I would just like to remind everybody that the next talk is the first Wednesday of October. And that talk is going to be a trip to Newfoundland. Howard Heffler and Lynn went there this summer, and they are going to take us on a tour all around Newfoundland. So, but you'll get messages about that later on. So thank you everybody for attending, great attendance, and we'll see you in a month.